This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so let us back up a little bit, a quick review of what we saw, what we learned last week, and then we'll move forward into today's issues and the material that I've added on to the source sheet. So we started last week with the idea that in Bereshit we were told that Adam and Eve were not allowed to eat any meat. I gave you seed-bearing herbs and tree, that's for you to eat, and to the beasts of the earth, right? Also given every green herb to eat. Mankind was not allowed to eat animals. Rashi understood it that we could eat meat, but we could not kill to eat, only if it died on its own. Others, Tosas also learned the same way. Others understood it to mean that no, that we were not allowed to eat meat at all. That is the Rambam's approach over here, that 6 precepts were commanded to Adam, and the 7th one was added on for Noach, meaning of the 7 Noahide mitzvot, so can't commit adultery, can't murder, can't worship idolatry, can't steal, can't curse out God, have to set up a proper court system, and only afterwards was added on Aver min hachai, not eating the limb of a live animal. That was only added on for Noach because Adam and Eve, according to Rambam, were not allowed to eat meat at all. So there's no point in prohibiting the limb from a live animal when all meat is prohibited. After the time, so that's a machloket, a dispute between Rashi and Rambam, we'll say. Rashi and Tosfot on one side and Rambam on the other side. They all agree that Adam, until the time of Noach, mankind was limited in terms of their meat. According to Rambam, not eating it at all. According to Rashi and Tosfot, you could eat it, but they did not have the ability, the license to kill it. However, Bereshit 9:2-3, that's already the time of Noach. Now, here it says, verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be yours to eat. Like the green vegetation, I have given you everything. So now, with the advent of Noach after the flood, mankind is allowed to eat meat, to kill and to eat meat. The Or HaChaim gave a number of reasons why it changed. Number one, we said his merit caused Hashem to maintain all the species, therefore they owe him their lives. Or he took care of them during the time in the ark, and therefore they owe him. Or his sacrifices caused God to deal favorably and promise not to destroy all flesh. Therefore, Noach is permitted to eat the fruit of his labors. Fair enough.
Rabbi, one
Yes,
quick question, please.
Mm-hmm.
It says everything, and now there were kosher and treif animals on the Aron.
Yes.
So
Noach was allowed to. Before the Torah was given, there were no dietary restrictions in terms of which animals one can eat.
Thank you.
No, right? Thank you, Steve. It's making a good point. We learned that Noach knew which animals would be the kosher animals, and those are the ones that he took 7, and it's from that he offered sacrifices. But until Matan Torah, until the giving of the Torah, there were no restrictions. All of the animal kingdom we were allowed to eat and partake of. Okay, there was no shechita, there was no slaughtering. None of that yet applied. A second stage that we discussed last week was the idea of what changed as we made our way from the desert into the land of Israel. And we'll see, right, Devarim 12:20, when the Lord expands your boundary and you will say, I will eat meat, because ta'aveh nafshecha, you have a desire of your heart to eat the meat. you could eat according to the desire of your soul. And 21, if Hashem chooses to put his name there, if that place will be distant from you, so then you could slaughter your cattle, your sheep, right? As I've commanded you. We mentioned last week how that is one of the hints to the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, because he says you can slaughter it as I have commanded you, but there's no commandment in the Torah as to how the slaughtering should be done. But that was given orally to Moshe and passed down. You may eat in your cities according to the desire of your soul. And over here we've got three different opinions in what happens. Rabbi Yishmael understands that they were not allowed to eat meat in the desert, beyond the sacrifices. Only those were allowed to be eaten. And once you enter the land of Israel, now you could eat, even not as part of a sacrifice being offered. Rabbi Akiva,
having the text on the screen.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I was asking Raj something about we're having internet problems like as you've experienced recently, and so I was asking about call-in versus full screen.
Okay.
On our I beg your pardon. We didn't realize we weren't muted.
Okay, no problem at all, Janet. Okay, so according to Rabbi Yishmael, they were not allowed to eat meat of tava, of desire, only under the guise of sacrifices. Once they entered Israel, they can eat the meat of sacrifice. Rabbi Akiva says that no, until then, in the desert, there was no shechita, there was no slaughtering that was done. Only once they entered, besides for a sacrifice, their regular eating was not through slaughtering. Once they entered the land of Israel, all meat would need to be slaughtered, but they were allowed to eat. So where's going Rabbi Yishmael? Entering Israel is allowing more than had been allowed before. Before, no meat outside of sacrifices. Now you can have meat outside of sacrifices. According to Rabbi Akiva, it is tightening the controls. In the desert, there was no need for shechita, for slaughter in order to eat. Once we enter the land of Israel, then we do need to slaughter in order to eat. Lastly, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said that no, it's teaching us derech eretz, that a person should not be eating meat, ella l'tei avon, only if it is for, if a person has such a desire, then one can. The Rambam follows like Rabbi Akiva. They would cut off their heads or slaughter, eat, as nations do. In the desert commanded, right, should only, okay, good. The Rambam also has his laws of Deiot, of Midot, of personal development. And there he speaks about a person should only eat meat with appetite. If your soul should crave to eat meat, okay? And it's enough to eat meat once a week, Shabbat to Shabbat. If he's wealthy enough to eat meat every day, he may, right? One should eat less than befits his income, dress as befits his income, provide for wife and children beyond that which befits his income. Okay, so that's where we got to last week. And it's interesting that the Torah uses the term ta'ava, that if you have a desire for the meat, then you'll be able to eat the meat. Now, we usually don't associate ta'ava with a very positive thing. And we're going to see some different opinions when it comes to abstaining from meat. Now, also, though, we do have to keep in mind and balance that with the idea that the Gemara teaches us, the Talmud Yerushalmi, that at the end of one's life, Hashem asks a person, did you enjoy all that I gave you in this world? In other words, we say that we'll see about a Nazir, a Nazirite in a moment. But we say that if a person takes on unnecessary additional fast days, that's considered to be a sin, because God gave us this wonderful world and he wants us to enjoy it. He wants us to enjoy this, what a wonderful world he has given us. So we're supposed to enjoy it properly, that which we can, in the way that we can, with a blessing before, with acknowledgement, with appreciation, but we're supposed to enjoy the world. Yet we see the Torah dances around a bit when it comes to meat. There was a time that we were not allowed to, and then we are allowed to eat it. So let's see some different approaches that we have. So first we have from the Sefer Ikarim, and underlined in red over there. And he writes, Asar lahem kitsat abale chayim. God prohibited for us, this is once the Torah was given, some of the living animals, hamolidim uvi va'achirut benefesh. They give this heaviness, this darkness to the nefesh. They have, the concept, you are what you eat. They have an adverse effect on us. Va'afilu ma shehitir lahem. And even that which the Torah does allow, lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. Whoa. The Torah is speaking to address the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. Interesting. Kamo shehitir lahem yafat toar al zeh haderech. We have a parsha in the Torah that when you go out to battle and you see a beautiful woman, then the Torah allows you to take her under certain circumstances throughout a whole procedure, but you're allowed to take a woman from battle, which is called the Isha Yafat Toar, the beautiful woman. And the commentators explain over there, Lo Dibra Torah Ela Keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah speaking is addressing the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, meaning that the Torah, Hashem knows that in certain situations, in the heat of battle, and such a opportunity presents, that a person will not be able to control themselves. If you say absolutely not, absolutely no way, prohibited. So the Torah gives you a way to do it. Right? You can't sleep with her there. You need to bring her home. You need to wait 30 days. Right? And then let's see if you still want to take this other woman into your home. But the concept is lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. The Torah spoke addressing the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. And he draws a parallel that when it comes to allowing meat, when it comes to allowing the consumption of meat, lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. V'chein amru zal, that's what our sages said, ki tave nafshecha lechol basar, the verse we quoted before, you have a taiva, you have a desire to eat the meat. Lim de Torah derech eretz. Our sages said the Torah is teaching us derech eretz, shelo yochel adam basar, ela tayavon. One should not eat meat unless one has a strong desire for it. And then he draws an interesting parallel. Kamo shahayayin. I'm skipping down to what's underlined again by the red. Kamo shahayayin. Let's look at wine, he says. Afal pi shehu mazon tov. It's a wonderful, wonderful food category. Umutar la'adam. And a person is permitted to have wine. We actually use it at weddings. You could also use grape juice, kiddush for Shabbat, weddings, brit milah, pidyon haben, at religious ceremonies of transition. We use wine. Nevertheless, yikareh katuv et hanazir haporish mimenu kadosh. A nazir, a Nazirite, is a person who chooses some added restrictions in order to elevate himself And there are three categories. He does not come in contact with a corpse, with going to cemeteries with dead bodies. He will allow his hair to grow so as to not get all caught up in just how do I look. And lastly, he stays away from all of the grape wine category of drinks. And such a person is called Kadosh, is called holy. Interesting. So it's not prohibited to have wine. On the contrary, it's a wonderful thing. But a person who decides to step back from it is called Kadosh. Rav Kook is probably the most vocal and the most pro voice about vegetarianism. And he writes as follows. And this is not translated, so I couldn't give you it right, but I'll translate it as I read. Excuse me. Bevo heter Torah lachilat basar, when the Torah allowed the eating of meat, acharei kedushat hamitzvot, b'matan Torah, once we have the holiness of the mitzvot that were given to us with the Torah, he'ericha b'hatzat hadvarim. It's very lengthy when it discusses this allowance. V'amart, and you will say, this is the quote from the Torah, ochla basar, I want to eat meat. Ki tava nafshecha lechol basar, you have a desire to eat meat. B'chol avat nafshecha, when you have such a desire, tocha basar, you can eat the meat. And he says, yesh kan ga'arat chacham nisteret. There is, between the lines over here, a ga'ara, a rebuke for the wise, nisteret, that is sort of hidden in the words here. V'ha'ara gvulit, and it's giving us the boundaries. Klomar, so as to say, kol zman shemos riotecha pnimit, as long as your inner conscience, your inner morality, lo tikotz ba'achilat basar balei chayim, will not be repulsed by eating the flesh of living animals. Kamo shekvar ata katz mi basar adam. Interesting. Does the Torah prohibit cannibalism? Does the Torah prohibit eating human flesh? The Torah does not explicitly prohibit it. Is it allowed? Of course not. See, he says, just like you already are repulsed by eating human flesh, the Torah did not need to write an explicit prohibition. One does not need to be warned against partaking of something that inherently a person understands, no, we don't go there. Because that is like it's explicit. So therefore, when mankind will arrive at that point, l'shaketz basar balei chayim, to also be repulsed by eating the flesh of living animals, because of the he says the disgusting aspect of it. Then you will not have a desire to eat any meat. V'lo tochal, and you will not eat. Sharei divrei Torah nidrashim michlal lav hein l'chal hein v'lav. From the positive we get to the negative, from the negative we get to the positive. Meaning if it says, when you have a desire, you will eat the meat. So what does that tell us? When you don't have the desire, don't eat meat. You will not eat meat. So Rav Kook sees in here that there was a certain finity that existed during the time of Adam and Eve, and therefore it was prohibited. It became allowed, but we will work our way back at a certain point to that. And if a person finds it repulsive, or I'd rather not, so that, he says, is okay. Now, what's very important over here is to differentiate. Meaning, if a person's attitude is, I have no moral right to kill an animal and to eat an animal, that goes against the Torah. You do have a moral right. And this is a very important point. Very often, those who are so against eating animals, it's not that they're lifting up animals to the level of humans, but it's because they're bringing humans down to the level of animals. I'm an animal, that's an animal. What right do I have to eat one of my peers, to eat something that's equal to me? And the Torah says very clearly, Uridu b'digat hayam. You will rule over. You are different. According to the Torah understanding, the purpose of creation is mankind. It was Noah who saved the world. And had there not been any people who were not intermingling in their sexual intimate relations, even if there were animals that were sticking to their own species, the world would not have been saved from the animals, because the purpose of the world is not the animal kingdom. The purpose of the world is humanity, who has the free will ability, and that we are in the image of God, to connect to God and to become more godly. So it's not that I don't have. What right do I have? We have a God-given right. Now, with that being said, let me just jump down over here. We have many, many restrictions in how we treat the animal world. And here's a list of some. It's prohibited to cause pain to animals. Tsar ba'alei chayim. We can't cause pain to animals. Meaning, when we are utilizing animals, it needs to be done in the most painless way possible. B, one is obligated to relieve an animal's suffering. Unburden it, even if it belongs to your enemy. If your friend needs some help loading up an animal, and your enemy needs some help unloading an animal, you go to your enemy first, because there the animal is suffering with that load. Help him unload first. C, if an animal depends on you for sustenance, you can't eat until you first feed that animal. D, and your animals are also have a day of rest on Shabbat. You can't do work, nor can your animals. E, you can't use two different species to pull the same plow. It's unfair to the weaker animal. It's also unfair to the stronger animal. It causes there to be a disjoint pulling, which is unfair to those animals. F, we send away the mother bird before taking her young. We don't kill a cow and her calf on the same day. Avram and Achai, we discussed before. H, which is to sever and eat a limb from a live animal. This is one of the Noahide mitzvah that applies to Jews and to non-Jews. Shechita must be done with a minimum of pain to the animal, right? They check the blade. If there is the slightest nick on the blade, they check it with their fingernail or with a hair. If there's the slightest nick in the blade, then it's going to tear as opposed to slicing right through. Actually, tear is, we use the word treif. Oh, it's treif, right? Treif comes from the root word of taruf. It's been torn. And if there's the slightest nick in the knife, then it won't be as painless as we can make it, and therefore the animal will not be kosher. The blade must be meticulously examined to assure the most painless form of death possible. Hunting animals for sport is viewed with serious disapproval by our sages, right? That's what Esav would do. But Jews don't go hunting for sport. You need to eat? Fair enough. But for sport, we don't do it. And this actually shows the incredible hypocrisy of a number of countries in the European Union, where out of humanistic, moralistic views, they prohibit any shechita, right, without first stunning the animal. But hunting, oh, no. Hunting, they allow. That is part of the culture. So to slaughter ritually, as we've been doing as part of our culture for thousands of years, for consumption of meat, that is morally repugnant to those repugnant minds and people. But for the fun to go hunting, can't take that away from people. That certainly is fine. And we're the opposite end. Hunting for no purpose, for fun, get your fun elsewhere. Shoot some hoops, play some tennis, get a good game of backgammon going, chess, whatever. Find your entertainment in a way that doesn't slaughter God's creatures for no reason. Tsar balei chayim, there's a tremendous amount of tsar that's involved in pain that's being caused when hunting. So in terms of our care for the animal kingdom, we are super sensitized. But we understand that it's an animal kingdom. And again, so often those who are militaristic in their veganism or vegetarianism, right? It's not because they don't recognize what a human being is, the mission that's given to us, the soul that we have, the domination that God gave us, not as a tyrant, but to utilize all that Hashem has given us to serve God. And for those who love meat, so on Shabbos you have your beautiful meals, you have a beautiful kiddush, and you have your wine. All of that, we say actually, if a person is doing it correctly, for the right reasons, we say shulchan domeh lemizbeach, that one's table is like an altar. It's like an altar, that we're using this in our service for Hashem. And interesting, the Shulchan Aruch writes, when it's discussing Mondays and Thursdays, and we say over there that Monday and Thursday, so the Be'er Heitev, let me find it over here. The Be'er Heitev writes over here, Lehitanot, by the Gimel over there, to fast. Noagim shlolachol basal loshtot yayin biyom bet vehei. It was the custom, he writes, not to have meat or wine on Mondays and Thursdays. Just like the Jewish courts would convene on Mondays and Thursdays, that's because the heavenly courts convene, so to speak, on Mondays and Thursdays. There are those who won't eat also at the night, on Sunday night going into Monday, and Wednesday night going into Thursday. V'ashrei lemi she'afshar lo lifrosh mi basar v'yayin kol hashavua. And fortunate, praiseworthy, is a person who can stay away from meat and wine all the days of the week. Shikach Nahag I think Shikach Nahag V'Arizal. And the Arizal, the great Kabbalistic Arizal, that is what he would propose. Right? That a person should abstain during the week. So we have here a bit of a complicated picture. Again, vegetarianism based on the idea that I have no right. Who am I to take the life of an animal? I have no moral right. That is not an acceptable Jewish view. You do have a right. Recognize, and again, it's not that they think animals are so high, it's that they don't recognize what a human being is and the mission that we have over here. But if a person is doing it for health reasons, at this point, there's a lot of health information coming out that the animal protein is not necessarily the best thing for us, right? Especially when eaten in large amounts. So there are those who say for health reasons. The Torah says, we've got to guard our health. Or if a person just has the sense, I don't need to take the life of another animal. I'm just as well eating other things. I enjoy it just as much, and I feel uncomfortable with that. Not that I don't have the moral right, but I don't feel comfortable with it. So that, Rav Kook said, is basically going back to the mindset of Adam and Chava. And just like he says by wine, that wine is allowed, but a Nazir who abstains is called a Kadosh. That was the Sefer Ikarim, not Rav Kook. Just like a Nazir, Nazirite, who abstains from wine is called Kadosh, is called holy, even though it's perfectly allowed. So too, the meat is perfectly allowed. But I would rather not take part of it. Now, very often, there's an interesting tshuva responsa from Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal, who said that he prohibited raising veal in cramped and painful conditions. Veal, the reason why the meat is so soft is because they're raised in these cramped conditions. They're not really allowed to move. So when you don't really move, what happens to the muscles? They become very, very, very soft. What is the meat? The meat is the muscles. Right? And he prohibited that. He prohibited feeding animals chemicals in place of food. That deprives them of the pleasure of eating. So certainly we need to be careful, caring, responsible stewards. But certainly, so we have to be very careful with that. But if a person feels, I'm not interested in that. I don't need that. I'd rather not have that. That is perfectly fine. I'll just end with a story of the Baba Rebbe, who was walking with a student, and they were deeply engrossed in their conversation. And as they passed by a tree, the student, as he was walking, pulled off a leaf and was tearing it up as they're walking, absent-mindedly tearing up the leaf as they were walking and talking. And the Baba Rebbe stopped. The student asks, "What's wrong?" The Rebbe asked him, "Why did you pick the leaf off of the tree?" And this disciple, this Talmud, this student had no response. And the Rebbe said, all that exists in this world, all of nature, the birds, the trees, even every blade of grass, everything in this world sings its song of praise to God. It is doing the will of God. There is a Perek Shira of what each of the animals, the song that each of the animals sing. But when they are doing what they are supposed to be doing, and the tree is beautiful, and the leaves are fluttering in the wind, and they are going through doing their photosynthesis, incredible what goes on, and giving oxygen to the world. It's just incredible. If we need it for food, for sustenance, we need it for clothing, whatever it might be, then we utilize it. That becomes part of the song of this higher species of mankind. But to pull a leaf for no reason and to shred it, he said, you are wastefully silencing its song, taking away its opportunity to join this incredible symphony of nature, of the world. So yes, we're allowed to eat meat. And there are restrictions how to do it, but we do it in order to give us strength, in order to enjoy God's world, in order to be able to stay alive and strong and function. Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. But if a person feels, I get a little bit squeamish, that's what Rav Kook had called that inner, what was the term that he used? Hamusariya enoshi. If human conscience is leaving you feeling a little bit uneasy with it, that is perfectly within the umbrella of Judaism for a person to say, I will get my sustenance, I'll get my strength from other items, which does not involve taking the life of something that living, breathing, as opposed to the plant world. So the Torah, very interesting, as often the case, so much depends on the mindset. On the mindset. Why am I doing this? And the most important aspect is make sure that we don't bring mankind down to the level of animals. Who am I to recognize who we are and the responsibility that comes along with that mission? Okay, my friends. I will call it over here. Anybody have any points? Yes, Julian.
Everything, thank you so much for doing that recap. And everything I sort of heard sounds to me like a mixture of pick your battles and shalom bayit. Like, ideally, you shouldn't eat meat or animals. That's what it sounded like to me. Ideally, in an ideal world, if it was practical and accepted by most people, we shouldn't eat animals. But that's not practical. It's not going to be accepted. So let's just make some rules to deal with that situation. Am I wrong?
I don't know if I'd say that according to Rav Kook, it's the ideal. But he is the extreme when it comes to he's the extreme in the rabbinic world when it comes to this idea, right? According to him, yes. Ideally, not. According to most others, this is our right, and it's not necessarily an ideal. If you don't want to, there's no obligation to. The Torah says, "Tav v'nafshecha," if you have a desire. If you don't have a desire, so then don't. But according to Rav Kook, I would agree. But again, realize I brought him because he is at the extreme of this pro-vegetarianism spectrum, right? Amongst the rabbinic world, we'll call it, the older established rabbinic world. But as long as one is doing it within the parameters, that is right. We also look something that Rav Kook will need to explain is that we speak about the reestablishment of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple, and of the sacrifices, and certain parts of the sacrifices need to be eaten. So how Rav Kook will take what his view and how that is going to fit with B'nai Veitcha Kavatchila, we say in the Musaf of every Shmona Esrei about the rebuilding, and will bring these sacrifices, those sacrifices, many of which needed to be eaten. Parts of it needed to be eaten. Some by the Kohanim, some by the Kohanim and the owners. So it's interesting to see the Korban Pesach. Right? The Korban Pesach is not vegan, and that everyone had that night. Right? So what Rav Kook will do with that, I don't know. I don't know.
But it could be like, once a year you do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, people happy.
Yeah.
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 It's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
he is at an extreme there, and yeah. But again, right? We can't bring ourselves down to the level of animals. Yes, Janet or Roger, are you live over there? I see green. I guess not. Okay, my friends. Good seeing everybody. Let me wish everybody a good Shabbos. Look forward to seeing all those who can make it. Look forward to seeing you all soon. Okay. Thank you for joining, and a good
Thank you,
day
Rabbi.
and a good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Rabbi, do you have a moment?
Thank you.
Yes, I do, Aaron.
Okay.
Okay. You
Okay.
want to stay on? You want to talk on the phone, Warren?
Let me give you a call.
Okay.
Okay.